Hi, I'm Gina-R-Farrar, reinvention coach, creator and host of Feminine Roadmap podcast, and leader of this amazing global community of women. If you are approaching midlife or are already in the thick of it, welcome home. Please grab a cup of something wonderful and join me for some real talk, practical strategies, and a big dose of sisterhood. I am so glad you're here. Hello, Feminine Roadmappers. It is Gina here. Welcome back to Feminine Roadmap Podcast, the podcast that helps you navigate the challenges and the changes of midlife and live a more vibrant second half. Today, we are going to be talking about a roadmap for us to look at our lives and come home to our best state of being by changing our internal habits so we can live in a way that is unlimited. And to have this conversation with me is Dr. Michele Kambolis. She's a therapist, a mind-body health practitioner, and the author of When Women Rise, Everyday Practices to Strengthen Your Mind, Body, and Soul. Dr. Kambolis, thank you so much for being on my show today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for having me on, Gina.
My pleasure. Now, I've kind of given this big umbrella statement. I would love for you to let my audience know what it is that makes you passionate about this topic. Why this mission and this message?
Well, thank you for that question. I wrote When Women Rise when we were in the middle of COVID, or at least the beginning of it. We're still very much in it, but when we were all in lockdown and really struggling and mired in fear, so many women were reaching out to me for support. And as they were, talking about their struggles, it occurred to me that many of the anxieties and the fears and the barriers that they were expressing had really started years before, decades earlier. And so, I really wanted to support women towards metabolizing and releasing and letting go of the inner conditions and habits that were and are getting in the way of their highest well-being. And every woman that I speak with feels disempowered in some way. They describe a sense of lack, a feeling of needing to do more and be more. And it's an overwhelming sense that our lives are not enough, that we're not enough. Does this sound familiar? I see you nodding.
Well, so many women, that's part of the reason this podcast exists, because there's a lot of suffering, if you will, out there, stuckness, dissatisfaction. And I feel like we need these resources to straighten that out. We're not alone. There is a way through and out to a more vibrant life.
That's it. And so many women tell me that they feel utterly exhausted by all of the doing and striving and proving and competing. And we know that women are twice as likely to have clinical levels of anxiety. Our nervous systems are taxed by chronic stress. So really, this was a way to provide some solutions so that we can begin to tend to ourselves, our whole selves. And so When Women Rise provides a roadmap that's rooted in evidence-based practice. So they're reliable tools and exercises to, and personal challenges to be able to incorporate into our lives so that we begin to calm our limbic system, become more present, more available, so that we can begin to hear our own inner voice a little more often.
There's the key, right? There's so much noise in our heads and in our lives that we are listening to voices that often are not our own, right? These habits or these ideas and beliefs that we carry have been formed over 40, 50, 60 years, and we're so used to them. There are in our minds and in our bodies, and we think they're true. And I love the idea of that tuning in, like you're talking about.
From the moment we're conceived, we're receiving messages of who we're supposed to be in the world. And so we're born and then we're identified as female, and then we're identified as maybe pretty or maybe creative. And so there's all these kinds of projections. And then so many women tell me, how focused they are on the needs of other people. And of course, we want to be able to be generous in our heart and in our spirit. And at the same time, so many women tell me that the amount of giving to others is costing them dearly.
And how we feel like we're not good enough or we're bad if we don't stay in that kind of over giving, over providing role. Because I think giving and providing have a place, but I think we lose ourselves in that sometimes. Is that what you're seeing?
Yes. I mean, one of the most wonderful reasons for being is to be able to be supportive to others and connected, and to be in seva, which is to be in service. And so that's such an enriching aspect of life. What we're talking about here is toxic overdoing, and really identifying with that helping role to such an extent that we forget to put that oxygen mask on ourselves, which is something that I'm very familiar with. And most of the women that I speak with are very familiar with. So when we're not tendering that balance and practicing self-care and self-compassion and loving ourselves through our stress, then that's, where we become in great struggle from a mental health standpoint and from a physical health standpoint.
Can you explain a little bit what's happening, not just in our minds, but in our bodies when we live in this state for a long part of time, this kind of stress, this kind of pressure? What is happening to us that we need to become aware of?
That's such a great question. We often think that all stress is bad, and that's just not the truth of it. Short-term manageable stress is actually really good for us. It allows us to be able to focus and perform and meet a goal. And short-term stress actually bolsters our immune system. It's chronic stress that causes inflammation and increases in cortisol levels, and really puts our mind-body system in such a state of fight or flight that our body is working so hard to be protective that we're more prone to disease, metabolic disorders, heart problems. I mean, the list is very long in terms of the impact of chronic stress. And the estimates are that 90% of doctors' visits are caused by chronic stress. So the implications on our mind-body system are really profound.
It's one of those things where our body is trying to communicate, isn't it? But if we stay in that chronic state of stress, it is hard to hear the messages, isn't it? Because we get used to that high level of either anxiety, worry, stress, overwhelm. I don't know. I think the word varies from person to person, but it's kind of all the same thing, right? Where we're stuck it's like a loop, isn't it? We're used to being there.
It is. And well, our body is very wise, but we're going so quickly. We're going so fast that we then don't have the openings to be able to really listen deeply. So when we pause in the day or practice meditation or yoga or walk outside in nature and connect in with our body to really listen to what it's asking for, then, it's a beautiful practice. And really our responsibility to ourselves to look after every single aspect of ourselves, mind, body, and, relationally. So I'm glad that we're having this discussion.
Now, this next question is probably a little bit more like your perspective, but if somebody's really stuck in this stress loop, the stress, anxiety, stress, worry, stress, comparison, whatever it is that's happening, because we all have levels of stress, I believe that we're not able to identify it because we're stuck. How does someone begin to break that loop? Like, I can't is probably the first story, right? I can't. Everybody's relying on me, or I can't. I don't have time, or whatever. What would you say to the woman that's stuck in that loop and thinks and doesn't know how to identify, doesn't know how to stop? It's become such a habit.
Well, first of all, I really like to normalize it, just to remind that we're all facing the same thing, that this isn't personal, that we're part of this massive ecosystem where we're all breathing the air of fear, that we're really mired in a culture of competition and comparison and competing. And so it just feels really important to remind ourselves that this is not because we're not enough, or that we're not trying hard enough, or we're not, somehow we don't have the same edge as everyone else. With social media, I hear so many people will say, well, everyone else seems to have it together, and why can't I keep up? And in reality, we're all in this struggle. So number one is to normalize, and number two is to look for openings. So where in the day can we start to integrate practices for self-care, for awareness? And in order to really get our health off the ground requires two wings. The first is awareness, and the second is compassion. So when we're tending to both of those aspects of our being, then we can fly into greater well-being. So awareness might mean just taking a pause in the day and connecting with our breath. We know that our breath is the gateway to our well-being. And so many of us are walking around breathing incredibly shallow and through our mouth. But when we breathe through the nose, low and slow, we're automatically calming the limbic system. So that's a simple way to come home to yourself and to support your health, to pause and take a low and slow breath, focusing more on the exhale, because when we extend the exhale, it activates the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the part of the nervous system that's really calming. And it releases a whole cascade of neurochemicals through our body that tells us, you're okay, you're not in danger.
I can tell you that is an incredibly powerful tool that I use. And sometimes I use it without realizing it because I've used it so much, like I'll find myself being in a situation and I do that whole inhale. Sometimes I hold at the top and then I do the really long exhale. And it does bring me back into where I'm at, or it helps me feel a little bit clearer in my head. So I just wanted to say that tool I use a lot, and it's so powerful.
Yeah. So when we're not in fight or flight, we can focus more, we can remember, we're more available, and we're more in present time. We also know that when we're ruminating about the past, or we're worried about the future, then our limbic system is taxed. But the breath is a beautiful way to be able to enter into the moment. You could just simply ask yourself, what is the quality of my breath right now? Mm-hmm. What is my breath telling me?
What I was thinking is, when you use the term awareness, that's a quick opening, isn't it? To just think, how am I breathing?
What am I aware of? First of all, what am I aware? Oh, yeah. And then the second question is, what am I aware of? And then the third step is to open to what you're aware of. So once we move into awareness, sometimes the egoic mind likes to go into judgment. If instead we open with great acceptance to whatever is meeting our awareness, whether that's pleasant or unpleasant, joy or anger, relaxation or, a sense of agitation, to be able to open to what's there with acceptance without judging. So equanimity is really our best tool to meet the moment in a way where we can be available to it.
I love that. No judging. Meet the moment. there's a moment by momentness of it. I think we live so much either in the past or the far future or the big picture. We need to kind of cocoon ourselves, don't we? A little bit here and there, and allow just a few moments, because it really does
Yes.
reframe.
Well, how many of us can relate to losing large chunks of the day because our mind has taken off? And often it's gone into future focused, fear-based thinking. So we're trying to prevent a problem. We're trying to prepare ourselves. And, our mind-body system is, it's very adept at trying to prepare us for an upsetting outcome. So we have to retrain the mind to really be wholeheartedly in the moment. And from that place, we can handle whatever comes. It's our only place of power, and it's our only place of real truth.
And it's really the only place we exist is right now anyway.
It's the only place that we exist. So isn't that fascinating that we spend so much time either in the past or in the future rather than the now, and it's our only place of true existence? There's a fascinating research study by a fellow by the name of Matt Killingsworth, and he collected information from people from 80 different countries through an app. And he asked 3 questions. He wanted to know, what are you doing? Are you focused on what you're doing? And how are you feeling? And so he collected like hundreds and thousands of data points with these questions. And he discovered something really important. He discovered that on average, people are focused on the moment only 47% of the time. So that is literally half of our life that we're missing. And he looked into it a little bit further, and he also discovered that it doesn't matter what you're doing, what you're thinking about. If you're thinking about the future and you're thinking about the future in a really pleasant way, you're still more unhappy than if you're in the moment and doing something that's unpleasant. So if you're cleaning the toilet or you're brushing your teeth and you don't like brushing your teeth, you're still happier than if you're imagining the future in a pleasant way. So by being in the moment, you really can't lose, even if the moment is an unpleasant one.
Isn't that interesting? It's like we're wired to know that that doesn't matter right now. Like in its own sense, like planning for the future is a good thing, but living in the future is the problem.
That's it. Yeah. So we want to be able to think about the future and use our intellect in order to plan and prepare and motivate ourselves for whatever's to come and dream our life forward. Dreaming is really important, but we don't want to live there.
How do you feel about visualization?
I think visualization is powerful beyond measure. Visualization is a way for us to be able to, use the power of our mind to be able to manifest. Think about what we most want. I'll never forget when I was a teenager, I was visiting Vancouver, and I was visiting a boy that I was involved with, and he was going to Emily Carr, to this art school. And I can remember sitting on Granville Island, looking across the water, and it was so beautiful. And I thought, one day I want to live here. And I'd like my home to be over there. And I'd like my office to be over there, to be working over, in this area. And I had this beautiful vision of how my life might be. And then, I tucked it away within my unconscious. It wasn't really within my conscious awareness. And 15 years later, I found myself sitting at Granville Island with my 2-year-old child, looking across the water at my home With the awareness that my office was, off to the east. And I realized, oh my gosh, I dreamt this 15 years ago.
Wow.
It was in a dream that I had completely forgotten about. And I think Eckhart Tolle also wrote down a manifestation of writing The Power of Now. And he didn't know what the name of the book was going to be, but on a piece of paper, he wrote down that he was going to write a book. He jotted down, several bullet points of what he wanted it to be about. It was very general, and how many copies would sell. And he tucked it away in a book, and he found it over a decade later after I think it was 20 years later or something like that. And what he had written down had been manifested almost to a T. So, I mean, there are anecdotes like that are really inspiring and kind of cool to think about. But really, how we envision our life becomes the stepping stone, becomes the actually the threads that we weave our life with.
I like that.
And thinking mind is incredibly powerful. We know that what we think we become, what we think we manifest. So when we can develop a relationship with our thinking mind that's rooted in positivity and possibility, it's ultimately using our mind in a very powerful way. At the same time, we want to be aware that we are not our thoughts, that we are something beyond the thinking mind, that the thinking mind is simply our tool.
That's the powerful thing. And I think one of the things we haven't really touched on that kind of ties in with this beautifully is that our beliefs, you said, how we envision our life become the threads we make our life with. So that brings me to the idea of our belief systems and the things that we believe to be true, or maybe they've been true because we've believed them, but they're not actually true, meaning there are other options out there in the way that we show up, or maybe we've lived a certain way the first 40, 50 years of our life. And now there's possibility that I think women need to recognize that there's a shift that's powerful in this season of our life with what we know and where we've been. And that belief system, what we think about ourselves and our world, really directs the way we choose to live. We think we're choosing to live, but we're kind of being driven by what we believe.
Yes, and women in particular, where we have been raised in this ecosystem that's masculine based, where we have been told how we need to show up in the world in order to feel safe, has an incredible impact on our sense of self. Mm-hmm. So to be able to have daily practices that support deep contemplation, a way for us to really be able to examine our own internal experience and deconstruct that which is no longer true, is so empowering, because we can then, cultivate a relationship with our true self, the essence that we were born as, which is already perfect and already whole.
I love how you said that we can deconstruct that which is no longer true, which supports the idea that there are seasons and reasons for those seasons in our life. And it's normal and natural to transition, right, from one thing to another. And it's okay to transition. And I do think sometimes we may give more power to that story, whether it comes from our family or our culture, be it family culture, be it nationality culture, be it work culture. I'm using culture in a very kind of broad sense. Whatever environment that we live in, that's what I mean by culture. It's that questioning the story, questioning the expectation, questioning well, is this really how I want to live my life? Back to your awareness point. becoming aware of whether this suits us anymore. And I love that you said, which is no longer true. Not that it was bad that you believed that at this point, but at this point, right now in this present moment, how would you like life to be? How would you like your path to go? What direction would you, not you and your belief, you and your culture, you and your family, that you by yourself, having that ability to be aware of your inner voice, I think is what I'm trying to get to. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. And I love the idea that we can be made anew at any moment, that the person that we were 10 minutes ago, 10 hours ago, 10 years ago is different than the person that we are in this moment. And we can't be conscious of what we're not conscious of. And so many of us are asleep at the wheel. There's an inertia to our life that tells us that this is how it is, this is how it's supposed to be, this is how it always will be. And then often we have an experience that really rattles us, that wakes us up. And it's in that awakening that we have an opportunity to really examine what we truly want, and what truly serves us at this point in our lives, because what serves us now isn't what served us in the past. And so to be able to just pause, to turn inward, to get still enough, long enough to be able to really look, is such a potent decision point.
That can be very uncomfortable, though, in a noisy world. To pause.
Oh, yes. Incredibly uncomfortable. Yes, it means really looking at everything that we've been avoiding. And at the same time, when we can just close our eyes and observe the breath and anchor in the moment and see that the thoughts really do have a beginning and a middle and an end, that they are impermanent and truly moving through, is such a gift, because we realize that all of these worries and all of these fears are really truly more benign than what we might have believed. Mm-hmm. And that all of these emotions that we have are a portal to exploring and getting to know ourselves better. And if we can just move out of aversion and trying to run away from the uncomfortable, we can invite it all in. And use that which is in front of us as a way to, discover ourselves.
And one of the things that you were talking about, we aren't our thoughts. I wanted to kind of swing back a little bit. It's so interesting how, our brains are there to protect us, right? We develop paradigms and frameworks to normalize, stabilize, protect, right? Like this is a natural, normal function of our brain and our system. So we're kind of saying, yes, thank you for protecting me, brain and thought process. But is this really true? And can we shift that in a way where my brain still feels like it's doing its job, but my life is being more in alignment with what I would really love to do and be? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So what we're talking about here is being able to observe your thinking mind. The thinking mind is a wonderful thing. But when we get caught up on the stories and add more to it, that's when we really find ourselves in trouble. As an example, your partner comes in and maybe he forgets to shut the door, or he walks in with his shoes on, and that's something that troubles you. The mind goes into potentially, but I've told him before, oh, he must not care about me. He's doing this on purpose. So we add more to the story, and that creates suffering. If we were to instead just take a moment and notice our own reaction. Okay, what's showing up here? Resentment. Interesting. What if I just made room for that and allowed it, so that that resentment could, still live in the same space as maybe curiosity I wonder what's going on for him. I wonder, why he's walking in with muddy boots. There might be something else to the story. It might be that he had a hard day, that he's stressed, that he's in a hurry, that he's grabbing something. Who knows? But if we can just pause and not add more and be present to ourselves and use our thinking mind in a way that's going to really be useful, then that's, very preventative.
In that process, because I think we all do that, because again, it's a normal, natural way. And depending on how we've been brought up, we might be more critical or less critical, or more inclined to conflict and less inclined to conflict, depending on how you perceive situations, right? So our kind of bent also gets involved. But I think there's this need to give ourselves grace so that we can also extend grace to other people, because we are going to do things that irritate other people, and they are going to do things that irritate us. So this awareness of that imperfection of life, I struggle, obviously, because I'm human, with that, because we want things to be a certain way, so we always know what to expect. And when something comes out of a direction we don't want it to come, it's easy to be negative. So let's talk a little bit about some of the strategies that you encourage people to use to begin to make these shifts, to begin to become aware, and to begin to reframe, refocus, rewire the brain so that we're making more beneficial choices with how we think and how we live in the world right now.
Yeah, that's such a great question. And I think what that looks like for each person is so personal to them. How you weave practices for self-care and awareness is so personal. But I mean, first and foremost, we've got to tend to our bodies. And when our bodies are functioning well, then we're so much more available to whatever's arising, pleasant or unpleasant. And that means getting enough rest and moving our bodies so that our neurochemical system is balanced, and so that we're getting enough blood flow to our brain system, and getting out in nature, which we know to be incredibly healing. And so all of these day-to-day practices really support our mind-body system so that it can function in a way where we have regulation, where we're not going off, where we're not zoning out. And eating whole foods, ensuring that we're, tending to our nutrition, that we're avoiding the kinds of foods that are going to really take us out of ourselves, let alone out of the moment. So when we're drinking a ton of caffeine, or have a lot of sugar in our diet, drinking a lot of alcohol, it's very difficult to lift the umbrella of consciousness when we're just struggling to be in our bodies.
And I think some of those things are tools that people use to numb. So it's moving them away from the goal of awareness. It's moving them away from the goal of presence and mindfulness.
And isn't it just such a powerful question? You're alluding to this. Just to stop and ask ourselves, is this serving me? And if so, how is it serving me? And if it's not serving me, what would serve me better? This is really the ultimate consciousness, to be awake enough to be able to ask that question. Or that series of questions.
That's a question I use when I coach people. When we talk about limiting beliefs, stories, is it true? We might have believed it our whole life, but is it really true? And then is it serving you? Because I think we develop coping mechanisms or ways to exist in whatever our environment is. And maybe our environment changes, but those habits follow us, right? And so they may have technically served us in that situation when we were 5 or 10 or whatever. And it became that your brain's like, oh, I have to function this way for us to be safe and okay. Right. And then I love that question. Is it serving me? How is it serving me? So not even just yes or no, but it's like, okay, if you think it's serving you, how? It's like that investigative questioning, or
Mhm.
so that we can begin to dig a little bit. And that's really what this is about, isn't it? It's about being willing to dig a little bit and get below so that we really begin to understand where we're at, what we need, so that we can make the changes, right? And it's a process. Right?
It's a lifelong process. And I think it's so brave. I think it's so brave to look at yourself in the mirror and examine what's happening here in my life. What are the patterns that I'm gripping onto? And in what ways am I getting in the way of myself?
There's a question. What patterns am I gripping and hanging on to, and in what ways are we blocking ourselves?
Yeah.
That could be a tough question. Yeah. That brings it home. So we're no longer, deflecting it to your childhood or your unhappy marriage or your whatever. You're basically saying this journey has to become about, not in a selfish way, but you. Who are you now? Who do you want to be? And where are you really at? Because you have to know where you are to know where you're going, right?
It's incredibly empowering to turn the lens onto ourselves. And yeah, can be very difficult to do that. Our habit is to look to others and go through our grocery list of all of the things that are getting in the way of our happiness. And yet when we wake up every day with the awareness that we're truly in choice, in agency, in full sovereignty, and we reclaim those areas of our life where we're not, then we're in command of our life.
So let me repeat that, because I think this is one of those profound thoughts. Paying attention to where, are we in choice, sovereignty, and agency, or are we not? Looking at situations where we might feel powerless, right? Or frustrated, and almost getting outside of yourself and observing it. One of the questions that comes to mind is, what can I do? In what ways do I have choice? And do I have agency over my life, or do I believe I don't, but I can have agency over my life? That shift.
So as an example, in your work life, you might go to work every day and feel incredibly unhappy. And there's an inner knowing that what you're doing as your vocation is not the biggest expression of your gifts. And it may be that you can't change that right away. It may be, though, that you can plan and prepare for something different. So the first piece is really just knowing that we're in choice. And even if we're making the choice that doesn't serve us well, to understand the reason why we're staying there and to own that is an expression of empowerment. And the third piece is you need to find a way to shift that in order to really live life in your highest purpose.
There's courage in that dreaming again. I feel like there is a loss of that thinking, especially with the way things have been in the last couple of years. It just feels like the world flipped upside down. And can we even do the things we dreamt of doing? We have to have hope, don't we?
Oh, hope is essential in our darkest times, in those times when we're facing inordinate obstacles. Hope allows us to envision a future forward. Yeah, I mean, when I think about hope, I just think about that heart space and compassion for self. It's really an act of self-compassion, loving ourselves enough to be able to see that life will get better, that the pain that we're in has a beginning, a middle, and an end. that it's impermanent.
Right. The storm always has an end, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. When you're in it, it's hard to see that.
And to not get lost in the middle, huh?
Yeah. That's why I love practices like meditation, because as you're sitting in meditation, there's an awareness that comes to you that whatever discomfort you're feeling, whether it's a certain thought that keeps coming back over and over and over again, or anger, sadness, fear, so difficult emotion, or a physical discomfort, like maybe you have an itch and you're in a practice where you're really meant to just sit still and try not to move and just observe it for a little while. Or maybe you're in a sitting practice where your hips are hurting or your knee is hurting. As you sit, the pain points just move through. Even the physical pain can start to dissipate and go away in time. And so it's a way to be able to observe all of the phenomena of life as impermanent. So then what we practice on the mat, we take into day-to-day life. And then when we come up against something very difficult, we have a reference point.
The thing I love about meditation is they always do the breathing exercise, right? But then there's that moment where it's like, feel your feet on the ground, feel your body being supported. There's that just feeling your body in the space you're in is something that I think we don't do. Like literally feel like you're supported by this chair.
Mm-hmm.
Feel your feet on the ground. Relax your shoulders, and just listen to the breath. I love the sound of breath. It's very soothing, I think. But meditation gives you that moment of pause, that opening. That I think meditation is. It's hard at first. I think people feel like you have to be perfect and monk-like, and you shouldn't have any other thoughts. But I use Headspace. One of the things he says is noting. If the thought comes. Is it a thought? Is it a feeling? Just let it float by like a cloud. And that practice I have found comes in handy, like in other situations.
Thought arises and you can just note it as thinking and come back to the breath. And so what you're describing is embodied presence, really being available to yourself as you are in the moment. And you also named something really important. The thoughts don't stop. So when many people, when they start meditating, they become very frustrated because they think they're not doing it right. Thinking just keeps going and going. And that is the truth of it. And in time, we get a little bit more distance from the thinking mind, or there's a few seconds of pause in between those words that are moving through. So in time, we just develop a different relationship with the thinking mind. The thinking mind doesn't stop. But we know that we are not that. Mm. We can see the thoughts as impermanent. We can observe them for what they are and be less tripped up on the content.
I like that. Less tripped up on the content. That's a good way of describing the way that we tend to live, right? Myself included.
We tend to take ourselves so seriously as well. And with meditation, there's a joy to that practice. You're also cultivating compassion and joy and all of these positive qualities that we want to embody. And it gives you a practice space for growing those parts of the brain that support those states of being. And you start to see that, it's not all so solid. All those thought bubbles are not so solid. So we don't actually have to take ourselves so seriously.
It's changing the weight of them, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So Dr. Kambolis, if you needed to give someone 3 anchor points from our conversation today, or it could be something you haven't said yet, what would you like people to take away from your mission and your message and this conversation?
Oh, thank you for that question. There's so many. How do I nail it down to 3? First of all, the message of self-compassion feels so important to me. We're all so hard on ourselves. So to integrate practices that are self-honoring, even just putting the hand at the heart and taking a moment to connect in with what you're going through, what you're experiencing in the most compassionate, loving, kind way is probably one of the most potent things that you can give yourself. The second is to tend to the body, to support your limbic system, to support your body with practices that are going to teach it the way of calm. That might mean breath work. It might mean decreasing your caffeine. It might mean getting more rest. Whatever it might be, you'll know what it is for you. But to begin to listen, to pay attention to tend to the body with kindness is of great importance.
And how about a third one?
The third is community. Leaning into our supports, knowing that you matter. And I think we've lost the way of community in our individualistic world. And everything that we know intuitively and in science tells us that a connected life is a meaningful and healthy life.
Mm-hmm. And it also, we get more lost in our own head when we're not in community. We need other people to help us challenge the things we say. Like, just why do you say that? Somebody else could hear your story or your words. And also knowing that we're not alone. Community comes up almost every podcast in some way, shape, or form, because it's how we're designed, isn't it?
Yeah. And it's where we evolve, where we do the work. It's how we awaken. We awaken through our relationships. Mm-hmm.
Well, Dr. Kambolis, how can people find you?
You can find me at michelekambolis.com. I'm super active on Instagram, so I love receiving messages and questions there. And you can find When Women Rise in your local bookstore. It's at Chapters Indigo and Amazon and all of the indie bookstores.
Don't you have a website for your book as well?
Yes, you can find that at whenwomenrise.ca.
Excellent. Well, Dr. Kambolis, I want to thank you so much for being here today and for just that wonderful, gracious, kind way and that compassion that you showed up today and the heart that I feel that you have to help people get to a more mindful, calm, peaceful place, to help them live in a way that's more in alignment with who they are. I mean, you're just a gentle and kind soul, and I really appreciate you taking the time to show up for my tribe and to love them in the way that you love them, to share your expertise with them and giving them tools to help them find that calm and that peace that we need in this world and in this season of life.
Well, thank you for your kind words, Gina. That's really touches my heart, and I'll take that away with me. And if any part of what we were able to, share in can support and heal and motivate your listeners, that's the greatest joy in it. And yeah, I thank you for this deep dive conversation. And this is really where the meaning making is, in sharing our stories and our own experiences of healing.
Yes. Well, thank you so much. Today, friends, I've been speaking with Dr. Michele Kambolis. She's a therapist, a mind-body health practitioner, and the author of When Women Rise, Everyday Practices to Strengthen Your Mind, Body, and Soul. If you head over to www.feminineroadmap.com/episode 251, you will find links to Dr. Kambolis there. By the way, it's Michele with one L, K-A, M as in Mary, B as in boy, O-L-I-S as in Sam, in case you are somewhere where you can write that down. And you can also join my tribe while you're there. There's a little pop-up. Just give me your first name and your email. I send out periodic encouraging emails. Friends, this is one of those great, empowering conversations. We want you to walk away encouraged, feeling hope, extending grace and compassion to yourself, and in doing so, being able to extend that grace and compassion to other people, finding those moments in the day where we can be more present and allow ourselves to just exist in a quiet space, whether it's 2 minutes or 5 minutes or 10 minutes. Don't judge it, just enjoy it. Get used to breathing deeply, listening to yourself, loving yourself, understanding that this journey is hard sometimes, but it is a journey that has beauty and possibility and hope. So let's build a community of beauty, possibility, and hope. This midlife journey is just the beginning of an amazing part of the life we've been given. And today is the current gift we have. So let's live that with an amazing amount of presence and purpose and joy. Thank you for joining us today. We look forward to sharing more information and encouragement with you in the weeks to come. Take care, my friends. Bye-bye.